I've been looking forward to this one for rather a long time. It's time to look at Terminator Dark Fate on 4K UHD Blu-ray. I was lucky enough to see James Cameron's The Terminator upon its original release in the cinemas back in 1984. Unfortunately, few others joined me for those cinema visits, and it wasn't really until it was released on VHS that The Terminator found its audience. That audience grew, and gradually the film took on a new status, so it was no surprise that a sequel was to follow in 1991. And that sequel was, of course, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. The Leicester Square Odeon had a unique 70mm presentation of this film, and fortunately someone had the good sense to get his Super 8 camera and take a trip down there after seeing the film. So here we have the Odeon Leicester Square as it appeared in 1991 when Terminator 2 Judgment Day was being screened. And yes, it was 70mm. It was a blow up from a 35mm anamorphic, unsqueezed to fit the 70mm frame, and it looked absolutely perfect. At the time of the Terminator 2 release, Super 8 prints were at their peak. It was around the end of the 80s, the early 90s to the mid-90s that print quality really did get up to an exceptional level. And I remember in that opening of Terminator 2 with the Future War sequence, I leaned over to my wife and said, if nothing else comes out on Super 8 of this film, I hope they just release an extract of the opening. It looked fantastic. And then shortly after we attended that screening at the Odeon Leicester Square, Duran Film Services released the original Terminator full length on Super 8. Now this was never a scope film, it was shown in the widescreen format here, which at the time was 1:66:1. It was 1:85:1 in America, and we have subsequently adopted that format for modern releases. But they released this in full length, Super 8, and the prints were stunning. This really is like watching today a Blu-ray projected in the home, and this was the early 1990s, and that really illustrates just how good Super 8 had become. It was the original mono sound, but fortunately a few years later the sound was reworked for the DVD release, put out in Dolby Stereo and Dolby 5.1, and so those of us with the capability were able to then re-record our Super 8 features into a fabulous surround soundtrack. As good as the Terminator Super 8 feature was, it did seem very unlikely we would be lucky enough to get a Terminator 2 feature on Super 8. But then somehow Duran did get hold of full-length scope Super 8 prints, and I was lucky enough to get one of their first prints, and here it is. This is on 2 reels just like this. Each one runs for just over an hour, and there really is something special about running this with a sumptuous Super 8 print in scope. Really is nothing quite like it, unless you're lucky enough to have the 35mm print, I suppose. The Terminator 2 Laserdisc, that came out I think in 1992, and just look at the packaging on this. This really is a glossy luxury item, and even though I later got the DVD, I never actually watched the DVD, but I occasionally take a look at the print quality on this Laserdisc, because for Laserdisc in 1992 it really was good. And if we were able to project that Laserdisc in 92 like we are today with modern video projection, I dare say a lot of journalists would have been telling the world that cinema in the home had finally arrived. Some of us had had it for years already with Super 8, but for the mainstream, Laserdisc was the way to go at the time. I realised when I came to do this retrospective, I don't actually have a copy of Terminator 3 in my collection. That's something I need to address, because I recall that I rather enjoyed that at the cinema. So in particular I enjoyed the Arnie line, "She'll be back," which I thought was hilarious then, and I still do. Probably tells you something about my personality really. But then in 2009 I thought this was a good addition to the series, Terminator Salvation. It's not a particularly good quality Blu-ray. It's not as good as the Super 8 scope print of Terminator 2, I don't think. But it's a good film, I enjoyed it. And then we had the follow-up in 2015, I think it was, where they went back to do a Star Trek style reboot with Terminator Genesis. I think that's enough said about that one. And so that brings us to the latest release and the moment you've all been waiting for. Terminator Dark Fate. Now, I haven't seen a single review or video about this at all before looking at it. I'd seen the trailer when it was doing the rounds in the cinemas, but I had no idea what this was about, other than I was pretty surprised to see Linda Hamilton return. I thought that was a great way for the series to go. That was as far as my knowledge went. Obviously I knew Arnie was in it again, and he looked better in this than he did in Terminator Genesis. I suppose the stress of being governor of California had left him by the time he made this. So there's probably one thing to bear in mind though when you sit down to watch this film, and that is that this is a sequel to Terminator 2. Terminator 3, Salvation, Genesis, they've effectively all been scrapped by this as though they never existed. And if this had been made just after Terminator 2, I don't think I would have liked the opening too much, because I remember going from Aliens to Alien 3, that opening of Alien 3, I'd had enough of the film by the time the end credits rolled. But this is done, what, 28 years later, and somehow that makes it okay to do what they do in this. I won't give anything away, I expect most of you know already, but that really does set the scene, and we've got a sequel to Terminator 2. It's a great idea. The film is relentless, and it absolutely does not stop ever until the end credits. So what of the image and the sound quality on these discs? You get a 4K and a Blu-ray, and I have my Optoma 550X projector set to where I like it, and pretty much up to now every disc has looked good on those settings. But the 4K disc of Terminator Dark Fate, it was a bit mushy in places, and most notably I think it was chapter 10 where the main characters are sat on top of a train at night. And at that point the picture was just completely black on this setup. It may be different on yours, but I had to reach for the remote and put the brightness up, which adversely affects the contrast somewhat, so I don't like to do that, but it was the only way to see what was happening. So that was not brilliant, and it carried on like that from then on. There were sequences where I thought the picture on this really isn't very good. And so after we finished watching the movie, which, as I say, we thoroughly enjoyed, I put the Blu-ray disc in to have a look at that, and immediately it looked better. And I've had this before, and I think, right, I'll play with the settings, but I didn't this time. I thought, no, I'm going to leave it, I'm going to look at it. I went to that chapter 10, sat on top of the train again. Immediately you could see more on this. And then I went to chapter 14, which is an outdoor sequence. They've just met Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator character. They're sat outside, he's got a pinky red shirt on, and that stands out on the Blu-ray without the HDR. I think the HDR corrects the colour on the 4K, and losing that vivid colour means that the image doesn't look as clear or as sharp. So the Blu-ray in that regard has got the edge. Now, it may look different on your system, but I checked it again on my television afterwards, and indeed the Blu-ray, the difference isn't quite as marked on that, but the Blu-ray is better. So is it worth investing in the 4K release of Terminator Dark Fate, given that information? You may decide differently to me, but I think if I hadn't have got this in the 2 for £30 offer from HMV, which I think is a very good offer nevertheless, if I'd have spent £25 or so on this, I would have been disappointed, to say the least. But I'm pleased to have it. I love the cover. I think the poster is great. I love the film. It's worth having whatever. The sound on the 4K disc is Dolby Atmos. I don't think anyone's going to be disappointed in the sound on this. It is pretty fabulous, whatever surround sound system you're running. The Blu-ray has got a DTS 7.1, Digital Theatre System 7.1, I think. But why is the picture so comparatively poor to other UHD Blu-rays? Well, this was shot, the live action anyway, was shot in 4.5K. Then the special effects had to be done. But it's possible that to get the effects ready in time, they had to render the effects at 2K. So this has gone from a 2K master as distributed to theatres and has been up-resed to 4K. Perhaps something's gone wrong at that stage, I don't know. But to me, it looks better having gone from the 2K to the 2K on the Blu-ray. So could affect your decision on what to buy there. So I hope you enjoyed this Terminator retrospective. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing so that I'll be encouraged to create similar content in the future. If I get enough subscribers, I'll be back. Until then, stay safe and bye bye for now.